So the NBA draft lottery was announced yesterday, and the reports are already surfacing about the Sixers being willing to move on from the 16th overall pick. We'll talk about whether that is a good idea or not. Also, would the Sixers be willing to do the unthinkable and draft Bronny James as a bribe for LeBron to Philly? We'll talk about it all. But of course, I'll start it off with the question of the day to Sixer Nation. Should the 76ers draft Bronny James and lure LeBron James to Philadelphia? Give me your thoughts on that down below in the comments section. We'll get back to that, but of course, welcome into Philly Take with RB. I'm RB. Drop a like if you enjoy this content and subscribe to the show to make sure you stay updated on all the coverage. We give you the news and rumors every single day of the offseason. And I want to start off with the draft lottery just in general. It was announced yesterday on a Sunday afternoon when nobody was really paying attention, and it was a crazy one. I will say the Hawks somehow finding their way up as a play-in team to land the number 1 overall pick. Wizards go number 2, and then the Rockets somehow climb into the top 4 as well and get the number 3 pick. The Spurs end up getting 2 picks in the top 8. So really just a lot of surprises, and the Detroit Pistons, who had the longest losing streak ever, somehow again land with the number 5 pick. Very unfortunate if you are a Pistons fan today. But as we know, the Sixers are right outside the lottery at number 16, and the reports are surfacing. Okay, the Sixers are seen, quote, league-wide as a candidate, per Sam Vecine of The Athletic, to trade their 2024 first-round pick. Number 16 overall. And Daryl Morey may be willing to move that pick, whether it is a part of a bigger trade. Maybe it's to stack up on more future draft picks. What do you think? Should they do this? Well, let's go ahead and look at some history surrounding the number 16 overall pick as it relates to these 76ers. And shout out to Adam Aronson of Philly Voice, who summarized all the information very nicely in an article. He says here that while the Sixers have been accustomed to picking at the end of the first round during the Embiid era, they were obviously used to picking early before that. The middle first round is a familiar landing spot for the organization. The Sixers picked within 5 slots of the number 16 pick in 7 out of 8 years from 06 to 13. And they did have the number 16 pick in 2 different drafts. That was in 2008 and 2011. And in 2008, they ended up drafting Mo Spates with the 16th overall pick. And then in 2011, they ended up drafting Nikolai Vucevic a few years later, and they ended up trading him to the Orlando Magic as a part of the Andrew Bynum trade. We're not going to talk about Andrew Bynum today, I promise. Speaking of another pain point, in 2018, the Sixers drafted Mikal Bridges at number 10, and they ended up trading him to the Suns for the 16th pick, which landed them Zaire Smith, and we also do not need to talk about that one today. So it has been a familiar spot, and the number 16 pick, in my opinion, feels like a hit or miss, right? Like you're either going to get a really solid role player with upside to be a starter, or you're probably just going to get a bust who doesn't really amount to much and is probably a back end of the rotation type of player. So the question is, do the Sixers really value this pick? Do they need to draft somebody? Everybody's been talking about how this is one of the weakest draft classes. What do you think they should do? Just to add some context here, last year, the Utah Jazz found a really promising point guard in Keontae George at number 16. And in 2021, the Rockets drafted Alperen Sengun. So there have been some hits at the number 16 pick, but it all depends on where you're at as a team, what you feel is the most important decision going forward and how you're going to get there. And I will say, I do have an inclination that the Sixers will try to trade this pick, which I'm not saying is what I want to do, but even though you probably don't want to hear this answer, I mean, it depends, right? It depends what your goal is. Do you want to go out and get a third star, another big premier player to pair with Maxey and Embiid? If so, then you're likely to have to trade that pick as part of a potential trade. I mean, there's no doubt about it. However, if you want to go the glue guy route and you want to draft some guys to build within and you want to hopefully find a gem who can be a complementary piece next to Maxey and Embiid and let that guy nurture a little bit here in Philly, then I think the 16th pick is actually a really good slot to do that. We look at the Sixers draft history, and it's no secret as to why this team has failed a lot in the playoffs. I mean, we can talk about the guys that they do have and the stars and coming up short and the coaching adjustments and all that. But the fact of the matter is they just have not drafted well like some of these better organizations. You look in the recent history and going back to 2020, which was Daryl Morey's first draft, he's never had a draft pick this high here in Philadelphia. And in 2020, obviously had his best draft. I mean, this is the standard, I guess, for Daryl Morey. You know, they got Tyrese Maxey at 21, Isaiah Joe and Paul Reed. And the next year they went out and got Jaden Springer, Philip Petrusev, Charles Bassey, and none of these guys are no longer with the team. And they got David Roddy in 22, but they traded that as part of the Melton trade. And then last year they only had the draft board mystery. They didn't even have a draft pick. So, you know, this is new territory here in Philadelphia for Daryl Morey. But let's go ahead and take a little step back in terms of his Rockets tenure. He really did not draft that much in the mid-first round. He did a few times early on. He drafted Marcus Morris, Patrick Patterson, Jeremy Lamb, and that was traded to OKC. He drafted Clint Capella at the end of the first round, Sam Decker, 18th overall in 2015. Montrezl Harrell in the second round right there. He drafted Dylan Brooks, Isaiah Hartenstein he actually drafted as well. And then he drafted DeAnthony Melton in the second round. So that was his last pick there, and it was traded. And it is funny how it feels like Daryl Morey only knows current and former Sixers, and that's who he tries to keep getting, you know, as part of the Philadelphia Rockets, I guess you could say. But, you know, it doesn't feel like Daryl Morey is one GM to sit here and just draft a young player, a young project. And, you know, he always wants to swing for the fences, go for the big names, which, you know, can be a flaw at times. So if you don't have the right trade, then, you know, why not go out and draft a nice complementary piece that can develop? I just think when you look at the Sixers time frame, where they're at, they want to win now. It just doesn't feel like they're going to keep this pick. But we will be doing a lot of draft breakdowns, and we've already started watching, you know, some different prospects in film. So we'll put out some lists and things like that of who they could target. But I think it all depends on the team strategy and really where they value this offseason and what they're going to do to hopefully make this team a championship contender. And just to add on to that, I mean, there's no excuse. There is no excuse. Keith Smith put out here the updated cap space projection. Sixers number 2, $61.3 million. I mean, that could even go up depending on what they do with guys like Paul Reed. And here you go. I mean, you have every asset at your fingertips. You have to go out there and build a formidable contender. There are no more excuses. You have to come out of this offseason with the right guys, and there's a lot of pressure. I mean, I would say Daryl Morey's on a hot seat. And speaking of being on the hot seat, trying to go out and get a guy like LeBron James. Like, I don't think LeBron James is coming to Philadelphia, right? If they were able to pull that off, it just wouldn't be, you know, a normal Sixer thing. They don't get the Brons or the KDs of the world. They don't get these guys. You know, when they do, they usually let them slip away. But would LeBron James at 40 years old be enough to get this Sixers team over the top? You're probably going to have to pay him, you know, $50 million per year. And unless he takes a huge pay cut to come to Philadelphia to play with Maxey and Embiid, it's going to be hard to build out the rest of the roster. And I think on top of that, you have injury concerns. You have other things, you know, whether it's, does Maxey have to take a bit of a step back in terms of his role? How does Joel Embiid play at that point? I think the benefit of having LeBron is obviously you're getting one of the greatest players of all time. He knows how to win, and he's going to be a guy who never lets up, never takes his foot off the gas. So I think he would really help Maxey and Embiid. But the question is, again, with this whole 3-star premise, can you build out the rest of the roster? And I think there's just a lot of liability for a guy who's 40 years old. We know his goal really is just to play with his son. And should the Sixers go out and draft Bronny James to try to make this happen, I mean, if you have a surefire answer from LeBron, I mean, that's a different story. But I don't know. I don't think Bronny James is worthy of a first-round pick right now. The upside, you know, is potentially there, but, you know, he has dealt with health issues, and he just didn't really get a lot of time to play this past season at USC. And it says here that, you know, he's expected to stay in the 2024 draft, and he will participate in all the pre-draft activities, starting with the draft combine this week. in my opinion, he has a lot of developing to do to become a solid NBA player. Obviously, he's LeBron's son, so there's always going to be a little bit of an advantage for him, but I just don't know if he's worthy of the 16th overall pick. And I have a feeling that LeBron is going to somehow end up back in LA, and they're going to find a way to get Bronny James there as well so that he can play with his son. Again, the Sixers have a lot of decisions to make. Maybe they do go for the LeBrons, the KDs. If you think back to the deadline, Daryl Morey inquired about these guys. Like, it is no secret. He had his hands up in there, pause, and he's going to do what it takes to get another big name to the Sixers this summer. Maybe it's Paul George, maybe it's Jimmy Butler, but I just think expending an asset like this to get Bronny James, who in my opinion is not ready to be a solid rotational piece yet, is honestly just a mistake. And what happens when LeBron retires in a year and then you're stuck here with a player that, may not be able to develop? So look, at the end of the day, I think that the number 16 pick could be valuable. I think the Sixers will try to trade it, but you never know. You never know. This offseason needs to build an identity for the 76ers team, and they need to get the right guys. Like, for example, I was watching the Nuggets-Wolves game last night, and Aaron Gordon drops 25, 7, and 5, goes 10 for 10 from the field, missed a shot with a couple minutes to go in the game, but he was a huge factor. Like, the Sixers need those types of players. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think they should keep that number 16 overall pick? Appreciate everybody tapping in. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That being said, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.